Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Perry with the Circle of Atonement, here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we're talking about the Course's version of psychotherapy. It's estimated that nearly 40% of Americans go into therapy at some point. And we all know that therapy is a huge part of modern life. But what you might not know is that A Course in Miracles has its own form of therapy, one that is entirely rooted in its thought system. In our discussion today, Robert and I are going to explore what the Course's version of therapy is, what makes it distinct from other forms of therapy, and what it actually looks like in practice. We're hosting this conversation ahead of our first formal training in course-based therapy, which begins on Wednesday, April 22nd of 2026. And if you want to join us, you can find the link for that at circleofa.org/therapy level 1. That's the number 1. So Robert, just to set the table here, A Course in Miracles was scribed by Helen Schucman, who was a psychologist, therapist in New York City, and her co-scribe, Bill Thetford, was also a psychologist. The course has a supplement that is devoted to therapy called Psychotherapy, Purpose, Process, and Practice. And in the early chapters of the text, there's a lot of teaching on psychotherapy with really detailed discussions on Freud, the structure of the mind, defense mechanisms, and so on. And so much of that content on therapy from the text was removed in the originally published version of the course. And yet, despite that, it's clear that therapy is a big part of the course's thought system. So, what do you make of that? Why do you think that is?
I think it's not that surprising given what a psychological nature the course as a whole has. And you can see the importance. I mean, you just said it has this supplement, one of two supplements that were scribed after the course devoted to psychotherapy. But that whole point is underscored greatly when you realize also there was all this material in the early part of the text. And clearly Helen and Bill in their editing felt that that was not meant for the course proper, and it was pretty much systematically stripped out. But the fact is that we have a whole supplement on the same topic, psychotherapy, which was meant for everybody. So it's there's clearly a good argument to be made that all of that early material on psychotherapy was just as relevant as the psychotherapy supplement. And when you look it over, it's a lot. So there's two whole sections about therapy. There's one section, very long one, that says it's written mainly for therapists. There's a section about psychic energy, and psychic energy was the driving force in Freud's view of the mind, the energy of what he called libido. There are three sections about the defense mechanisms. There's this ongoing conversation with Freudian psychology and Freudian therapy. There's an extensive picture of the levels of the mind, most of which are not the conscious mind, either above or below it. And there are 43 references to therapy or therapists in the text. And all of that got cut down to two references in the FIP edition. So they were really intent on stripping this material out. Almost everything I just mentioned, not everything, but almost everything I just mentioned got stripped out. But when you realize how much was there, and then when you add in the psychotherapy supplement, it suddenly becomes very clear that the author of the course was intent on getting his form of therapy expressed.
What you've been working on, what we've been working on here behind the scenes at the Circle for over 3 years, is a deep dive into all of that content on therapy and trying to pull the picture of what miracle minded therapy or course based therapy looks like. So, can you just summarize in your own words what that picture is? What is course based therapy? And how is it different from conventional therapy?
I've been chasing that answer for so long. I did a detailed study of the psychotherapy supplement about 25 years ago, and I've been trying to just get my mind wrapped around your question ever since. And this is what I've come to, that what we're calling miracle minded therapy is designed to move a person from one worldview to another. And by worldview, I don't mean like a formal set of beliefs. I mean one's emotional worldview. How do your emotions see things? And the essence of it, I think, is something that the Manual for Teachers describes very briefly. It talks about what you think you are and what you believe the relationship of others is to you. So the worldview I'm talking about on this emotional level is what you think you are and what you believe the relationship of others is to you. Now, the worldview that is our starting place, our current worldview, involves seeing ourselves as this weak, flawed, embattled self at the mercy of a much larger, uncaring world. And this world we feel has hurt us and wounded us and hasn't loved us. As a result, we're in a state of fear, wondering what it's going to do to us next. We have a whole battery of defenses we use to protect ourselves. And along with all of that is a great deal of anger, judgment, condemnation, mostly unconscious. But if you thought the world had done all this to you, of course you would feel that way. And all of that anger leads to an enormous amount of guilt, even though the guilt is mostly unconscious. But the guilt in turn leads to physical illness, the Course says. So the idea behind miracle minded therapy is to lead the patient to essentially the opposite worldview, where they are a strong self that has agency and is the cause of their own, not just actions, but of their experience, their emotional experience. And then seeing a world that is powerless to hurt them and impose suffering on them, which brings freedom from fear. And seeing other people not as the enemy, but as people who possess worth and innocence and equality. And all that leads to a very, not just a positive stance towards oneself, but a positive stance toward the world. And that's positive emotionally, how you see and feel towards the world, and behaviorally, which leads to a stance of generous, extending, helping behavior towards others. And all of that leads to a view of the self as not just strong, but also good, as innocent and good. And the Course says that even heals the body. When that deep reservoir of guilt is sort of undone, shined away, physical health follows.
Just for anyone who's like, okay, I need a really clear, simple picture of course-based therapy. I know you said you've been trying to do this for 25 years, but can you sum it up just a few sentences what it is?
let me try. I mean, if I would just, I think, crunch down that longer version I just gave, where it's attempting to move the patient from a worldview in which they are a weak self at the mercy of an uncaring world, uh, to the opposite worldview in which they're not only a strong self, but they're truly good, and they have a positive, loving, generous orientation toward the world. And the idea is through the conversation between therapist and patient the patient is moved from one worldview to another. So they now have a totally different answer to that question: what are they, and what is the relationship of others to them?
Okay, that was good. That was good. So it's a difficult thing to move someone from a one worldview to another. What is it in the course's view of therapy that gets us from point A to point B?
Well, the actual movement inside the patient from A to B is, and the course would say, forgiveness. Forgiveness is the main way in which we move from that one worldview, which is basically a negative orientation towards the self and a negative orientation towards others in the world, to a positive orientation towards both. But it's forgiveness, as I think, as course students, we would expect, defined in a very different way, where we don't just let go of those negative feelings. We we have a change in our perception so that, feelings are supported by how you see things. And so, if you're really going to let go of the anger and the resentment, you have to have a change in how you see things, a change from seeing the world, for instance, as more or less your enemy out to get you, to seeing a world that can be loved and can be, extended towards and helped. And that that shift in perception, the phrase we're also familiar with, from the one view to the other, is what the course is talking about as forgiveness.
As we've been deep diving into miracle minded therapy behind the scenes, one of the things that I've been struck by is how goal oriented it is and how different that is from conventional views of therapy, where the patient tends to be the one who sets the goal. So, for example, I had a relationship with a therapist, and when we were first meeting, she said to me, "Well, what's your goal?" I got to set the goal. And in course based therapy, the goal is set for the patient. The course is leading them somewhere specific. So, can you talk about that? Where the course is leading patients in its view of therapy?
It is true that, I mean, the course says that the patient comes in with goals that are essentially part of the problem in their head,
Well,
right?
better tools to navigate an attacking world, right? We
Right.
want to have better armor against the world and all of its troubles and trauma.
We want to be capable and confident and be able to basically win our war with the world. The course has an interesting line that relates to your question, or the psychotherapy supplement, actually. And it says that the therapist listens patiently to each one, but listening to them not so they can set the goal, but so that they can essentially, define or help define the means by which they get there. Because each person is going to get to that goal in a different way. But if they set the goal, then their psychological issues can just run rampant. They can control the process.
And so just to clarify, the place where the course is leading us is to where we have a different orientation towards the world. It's not this attacking force. What is it then?
The idea is we see the world through the eyes the course would have us see the world, where I think there's two sides to it. One is that it's powerless to hurt us, and the other side is composed of people who can be genuinely loved and genuinely forgiven, and therefore our orientation towards them is one of extending to them, one of joining with them, rather than, being defended and
Mm-hmm.
being angry and being afraid. So I think, it's different versions of what I've been saying. But you're right that we think of therapy as being more open-ended, more determined by more trying to access the inner wisdom of the patient. And it's not that miracle-minded therapy wouldn't do that. It wouldn't be waiting for them to come up with the course's goal or them to come up with the course's worldview.
Well, that's really what I was getting at and I don't have a ton of experience with conventional therapy, although the therapist that I had was very effective in navigating the challenge that I had put in front of her. But that's my point. I put the challenge in front of her and I said where I wanted to go. And she was kind of like and if you're bowling and you have the bumper lanes, right? She was the bumper lanes to just make sure that the ball that was me in the therapy sessions got to the pins, right? So in the course, it's different because one of the therapist's tools is teaching. So you're, as a therapist, leading your patient somewhere specific, which is so different than just letting the patient chart the course of where he or she wants to go.
True. And a lot of the flavor that I've picked up and you pick up a lot just living in the culture about therapy is you really just draw the wisdom out of them. And I'm sure that there's all kinds of forms of therapy that aren't about that at all. But this is quite different. And one of the ways it is different, as you're saying, is there's clearly a lot of teaching involved. And that's been a bit of a kind of a surprise to me. One of the things that we've done, and you know this, is look really closely at basically an instance where Jesus does therapy, you could say, on Bill. It's not really a conversation because Helen's just taking dictation. There's not a back and forth with Jesus and Bill, but Jesus is responding to Bill's attitudes and objections and all kinds of things. So it's a kind of conversation. This is in the CE. It's in chapter 3, section 8, the essential goal of therapy. It's not in the FIP edition, but we've looked really closely at what he does to move Bill from A to B, as you said earlier. And he does a lot of teaching, not just teaching. He reasons with him. He says things that are motivating. He deals with examples from Bill's life, either examples that support the new point B, or examples that Bill thinks support point A, and then Jesus will reinterpret them so they now support point B. He asks Bill questions for reflection. He gives Bill an assignment. There's all these tools that he uses to move him from A to B. But yes, the problem gets defined to a large degree for Bill. The goal gets set. That's A. The goal gets set for a large degree for Bill. And then Jesus is just talking him along the path from A to B. And like you said, there's a lot of teaching involved.
There's teaching involved, and I'm struck by, even though the goal would be the same with every patient, you're trying to lead them to a particular place, he treats Helen and Bill very differently. And so he tailors the way that he communicates to their specific issue. Helen is anxious, Bill is withdrawn, and Jesus will touch on their specific issues in a way that's motivating and personalized to them. So, what other tools do therapists have in the course to move patients from one worldview to the other? Teaching is one of them, but talk about some others.
Well, there's a lot of specific tools, and I kind of rattled through a bunch of them. There's motivating the patient, there's dealing with examples from their life, reinterpreting examples, situations from their life. There's asking what the course calls real questions, where just asking yourself a question can call into question the way you're seeing things now. And we can talk a bit more about that if you want. But I think everyone's been through situations where just asking yourself a question leads to a change in your mind. He answers objections that Bill has. Like I said, he gives him an assignment, a duty. He gives him an assignment also to ask a question of himself very seriously. But then there's also kind of more intangible kinds of factors that are brought to the table. One of the big ones is the relationship between therapist and patient. And a major theme in the psychotherapy supplement is the two of them forming what the course calls a holy relationship. And that gets formed once the patient can question their original goals and the therapist can question their original goal because their original goal was not entirely about what it should be and not entirely one that permits joining. They
What
just
was
want to
their
change
goal? Oh, they just want to
their
change the
goal. They
patient.
change the patient. The patient
Hmm.
wants to solve all their problems without really changing anything substantial in them. The therapist wants to change the patient in some way that the therapist thinks is real. And so they have to slowly abandon those goals to where they unite on that the goal of changing the patient's worldview, as I've been talking about it, their emotional worldview. That's not a real change. That's not a change in the patient's reality, but it's a deep level change in their mind. And if they can unite on that, they form a holy relationship, and there's tremendous healing potential in that. Did you want to say anything about that?
Well, I do want to say something about that because the course treats the therapist-patient relationship like it's just as valuable for the therapist as it is for the patient. That there's this deep bond that is formed, and the therapist is helping the patient unwind twisted perceptions, but the patient is offering some things to the therapist as well. Can you talk about the that dynamic?
There isn't a lot said in the psychotherapy supplement about what the patient offers exactly. It's clear, I think, from the whole teaching of the course that the holy relationship is the source of salvation for everyone, that each person who joins in a common goal, and which then invites the Holy Spirit in, benefits just unimaginably. But the idea is it's not just a business transaction, it's a real relationship that transcends the bounds of a normal kind of economic arrangement.
One of the things that I think is beautiful about how the course describes the relationship is that it's built on perfect equality. In the which section is it in the course where Jesus lays out those four rules of therapy, and
That's the essential goal of therapy.
the essential goal of therapy section? And the first one is that the therapist must recognize the perfect equality between them and the patient. And so there's not this sense of the therapist is so much more advanced and pulling the patient to this place. There's a sense where the therapist has to be more advanced, has to be further along than the patient in order to lead them somewhere. But at the same time, I think it's just different when you're, as a therapist, coming into the relationship, seeing your patient as how the course wants us to see everyone in their true nature. It changes something, in other words, I
Sure,
think.
sure. And you don't have to be equally mentally healthy to be equals, right? The course wants us to consider ourselves equal with everyone. And in that part, as you know, in that part in that you're referring to, it says Jesus says this equality must include me. So even though he's phenomenally more advanced than us, he's asking therapist and patient to consider themselves equal and to consider him their equal.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some pretty strong words about this whole issue towards the end of the psychotherapy supplement. So it's a major concern of his when it comes to therapy.
How would you describe that major concern?
That there's a recognition, especially on the part of the therapist, but on the part of everyone involved, that everyone involved, therapist, patient, and Jesus, are all perfect equals.
Hmm.
Rather than, the really kind of stark line in the psychotherapy supplement is some therapists consider, healing to be collecting bodies to worship at their shrine. And then he
Meaning,
says,
like it's feeding the ego of the therapist.
yeah, that he just has a bunch of patients worshiping at his shrine. And then he says many patients too consider this strange procedure to be salvation. So we all know what that's like, where you think that if you can be in a relationship with a rock star therapist, coach, spiritual teacher, you name it, then just worshiping at their shrine is somehow saves you. And they're thinking just having you worship at their shrine saves them. And it's obviously it's a sick
Not a
relationship.
great dynamic, yeah.
Yeah.
There are, just switching topics here, there are so many different forms of therapy in the world. And you've said that in your research, you think that miracle minded therapy is closest to cognitive behavioral therapy. So, talk about that, what you see the similarities are, and how they differ.
Like I there's so many forms of therapy out there. I'm not in a position to know what's the closest, but over the years, it just keeps striking me that cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, carries so much of the same approach and spirit. But what I would say is that miracle minded therapy is a kind of a deeper form, you could say, of CBT. And I know deeper sounds better. Obviously I'm biased here, but I think deeper is it's a very reasonable, justified word to use, and I think that'll become clear as I talk. So, first of all, I think the connection itself is interesting because CBT seems to have the strongest research behind it for its effectiveness. It seems to be the most effective, on balance form of therapy we have today, according to the research that's been done. The essential insight, as I understand it, behind CBT is that our emotional reactions are driven less by events themselves and more by the meanings we assign those events. Well, my goodness,
Sounds like
everything
the
the course,
course.
it sounds like the course, everything the course has us do, is kind of based on that insight. If we can assign a new meaning to events in the world, we can have a different emotional reaction. Now, an example that I came across for CBT is someone has this thought, they're about to give a presentation, it might be professional, it might be at school, it might be, whatever. And their thought is, I'm going to fail this presentation. And then through their work with their therapist, their CBT therapist, they can come to a new thought. And something like this: I'm nervous, but I'm reasonably prepared. And I've done similar things before. So there's a decent chance I'll do okay. Now, that's the very kind of thing your friend might or your coworker might tell you. We're very familiar with that kind of reasoning. And where you do change your perception, you do feel better. Okay. How would you not feel better having the second thought versus the first? The course, in contrast, it is built on that same insight. Our emotional reaction comes from the meanings we assign. But if you look at the basis for that new meaning assigned in CBT, it's very specific to these circumstances and this person. I'm reasonably prepared. I've done similar things before. There's a decent chance I'll do okay. It's about the specific conditions that I'm facing here. And then you have to wonder, well, what if I'm not prepared? And what if I haven't done similar things before? And what if I don't have a decent chance at succeeding here? What the course does is it's trying to get us to assign new meanings, but on a much deeper basis. In miracle minded therapy, we're reevaluating things, the nature of ourselves, the nature of others. What are they to us? What is our relationship to the world on a much more kind of deep and universal basis? So questions the course might have us ask is my worth determined by my performance with this presentation? Am I an image that is affected by the image that others hold of me? Am I doing this presentation to get something or to give something? How do I see the people I'm presenting to? Are they enemy? Are they competitor? What? What's my fundamental relationship to them? And so, what the course is doing is taking the same insight that our emotional reaction comes largely, or maybe even entirely, from the meanings we assign things, but just taking that much deeper so that the new meanings we come to are based on a new view of reality itself rather than a new view of the very specific details of my current situation.
When you're talking about this, I'm reminded of the forgiveness challenge that we had here a few years ago, where every day for 30 days we walked participants through one idea in the course related to how to forgive someone with whom we're holding a grievance. And one of the things that really struck me in that challenge is you're not resting your forgiveness on letting a grievance go. You are letting the grievance go by resting on a different view of reality. And so when you have a different view of reality, you're more easily able to forgive versus holding on to this thing that the other person did to you and how it affected your life and how it set you back and that kind of thing. So when you start to pick up these themes in the course, you see them everywhere. And so it's not surprising to me that this form of therapy would be rooted in the same kind of forgiveness that the course talks about in all of its volumes. And
Yeah, of
so
course.
if you're moving from the world is constantly attacking me and I need better armor to get through this place over to, you know what? I have a completely different picture of who I am as God created me, who they are as God created them. And I'm going to go through the world entirely differently because my foundation is on a different view of reality. That is a remarkable gift that I think the Course has given the world. Because if we could go through life that way, we would be far less affected by the choppy waters that we face every day in this place.
Mhm. While you're talking about forgiveness, I'm thinking we do the same thing more conventionally with forgiveness. I've heard, well, I can forgive because even though they did something to me, I learned from it. Or I can forgive because even though what they did was cruel, I know that they were treated cruelly as a child. So we look for details in the situation that we hope can help us get to a more forgiving view. But those details, how deep do they go? And will they always be there? Sometimes we're going to be mistreated by somebody who had a great childhood. Okay. It happens. And people who have great childhoods are not perfect people. They're going to do things to us. Sometimes the only thing we learned was maybe avoid that guy. So the course is always saying, let's not base our shift in perception on some superficial detail, but on a reexamination of what's truly real here.
It's interesting that you're talking about childhood because childhood issues are such a core part of conventional therapy. And the course doesn't want us to delve into our childhoods and analyze what's been done to us because that's the source of all of our problems now. What happened to us then? The Course criticizes that point of view. There is a quote about this that I wanted to read. It's in chapter 5. And I think this is the question of karma section. And the Course says patients in psychotherapy frequently go over their childhoods in some detail and at considerable expense, and it merely encourages their egos to become more tolerable to them. What an interesting phrase that patients in psychotherapy go over their childhood in some detail at considerable expense. And the result of that is it encourages their ego to become more tolerable to them. And what he means by that is if I, through my therapy, determined that the reason why I'm so angry is because my dad was so angry in the home where I grew up, well, then what I've really done is justified my anger versus heal it. The Course says, are you interested in that same section? The Course says, are you interested in healing your insanity or studying its past? So it doesn't really matter why I'm angry from a Course perspective. The Course just wants me to dissolve my anger. And so it doesn't focus on childhoods and is has critiques of that. Do you want to say more about that idea?
I mean, obviously, the world of therapy is so vast and multi. There's so many forms out there, but it's interesting that much of the driving force behind the invention of CBT in the 60s and 70s was in reaction to that Freudian approach that Jesus is talking about there, where you spend all this time delving into your childhood, hoping that the insight into where some pattern of yours came from will result in healing. And the idea behind CBT is whatever happened back then, you can assign things different meanings now. And apparently that is why the research is so strong for the positive effects of CBT. That approach works. And that's what the Course is doing too. You know, whatever happened to you, you have a choice now. I can certainly see, I mean, some people have had horrific childhoods. And I can see, you know, in those cases, I can see miracle minded therapy going into to revisiting those things, but with an eye, not for now I understand why I am the way I am, with an eye for I have a choice now to see that differently, to see that as having no power over me, to forgive in the sense of forgiveness in the Course. But I do think that there somehow, I don't know what's going on in all the therapist offices, but what's soaked into our culture, it seems, is that old Freudian idea that all goes back to our childhoods. And if we can find what was done to us, we kind of get a pass on our nasty ego, right? It becomes quite tolerable because I didn't cause it, somebody else caused it.
Well, yeah, and again, I don't want to be critical of conventional therapy. As I mentioned, I've been well served by it, and one of the tools that my therapist used was inner child work, and I found it to be helpful. At the same time, I also see where Jesus is coming from in that line. Are you interested in healing your insanity or studying its past? Because everyone knows someone who has, I assume everyone knows someone who has emerged from conventional therapy more guarded, more angry, more boundaried, and less loving. And so what they've learned in therapy is some form of yes, yes, the world really did do these things to you. The world really did give you a terrible uh, hand of cards. And so the way that you get through from this point on is to defend yourself so that what happened to you before never happens to you again. And so you emerge from therapy like with more armor versus less. And talk to us about how the course is trying to get patients to a place where you emerge more loving, not more guarded.
There is an interesting line in that section that you've been referring to, the essential goal of therapy, where he says all therapy should do is try to place everyone involved in the right frame of mind to help one another. So the goal of this therapy is you come out of it in the right frame of mind to help others. And so much of what we see with people coming out of therapy is what you said. Whatever the therapist would say the goal was, we see people coming out where at least, noticeably sometimes they get kind of a warrior mentality. I now know what was done to me. I know that my part of it was I let them. I tried to be too accommodating, right? Too focused on the needs of others. And now my mental health move is to get this warrior mentality where I'm going to protect my needs, I'm going to set my boundaries, I'm going to make sure you obey the boundaries I set. And it doesn't seem like it doesn't feel healthy. And so what the course is trying to do is rather than assume that that whole picture is true, I am this weak, wounded self that has been brutalized by an uncaring world. It's getting us to kind of look at and dismantle that whole worldview and replace it with a new one. And that's a process. But I think that way lies health. We're not going, as long as we're in the boundary warrior mentality, we're not going to really like ourselves and we're not going to like everybody else. I think mental health is where we have a truly unabashedly positive orientation towards self and others and world.
I don't have any stats on this, but I do wonder if what we keep hearing about in the world today, which is this fractured relationship between parents and kids, where kids go no contact with their parents, I, I I can't help but wonder if that's somehow tied to the uptick in therapy, where kids go into therapy and in the process of delving into their childhood, the parent gets the blame for the problems in their life. And then, well, what do? You've identified the person to blame for your problems. And the solution is, well, you've got to cut that person out of your life. And I'm just seeing this real wave of kids who are cutting off relationships with their parents. And I just feel like there's some kind of tie here with
Oh yeah,
these ideas of conventional therapy and what's happening in these breakdown of relationships.
sure. I mean, I don't know. I've been wondering about something quite related, and that is you and I talk about what we call the cult of self, which is this orientation where it's all about me, and that's somehow that's not just a view to evolve out of. That's like the view to evolve into that we see present in spirituality, that we see present in our culture. And I can't help but wonder how much that cult of self orientation has been influenced by therapy.
Well, David Brooks is a former New York Times columnist, and I'm working on a sermon now that's on the back of some of his ideas that I feel overlap with the course. And one of the things that he talks about in relation to the breakdown of civil society that we're all seeing around us, people are sadder and people are meaner, it seems, than they have been in the past. And what's at the bottom of that? And one of the things that he says, and I think he's right about this, is that in the past few decades, there's been this shift from what we all considered to be shared cultural values. You want to be honest, you want to be kind, to what he called, and I don't know if I would go this far, but what he called therapeutic values, meaning your worldview goes from we're all in this together and we should be kind to one another and work for the together for the healthy functioning of the whole, to okay, I've been hurt and now my worldview has shrunk down to it's all about me. And that's what you're saying in relation to the cult of self. How is this world affecting me? And that's the only thing that really matters. And from a course perspective, what is that but ego? The ego is the
Right.
ultimate I. It's only about me. And so if your therapy is pulling you to this place where it's only about you and how the world is treating you, and you better boundary up because you can't let what happened to you happen again, well, then your therapy has pulled you more into ego versus out of it. And
Yeah.
now you're really in trouble.
Right. And are you healthier just because you've learned how to stand up for yourself? Are you really healthier? I You're reminding me about something else that David Brooks said, and it sounds like he's specifically drawing the therapy connection there between what we call the cult of self. I mean, he's calling it therapeutic values. He also mentioned a lot of the self-help out there on the market. He mentioned the let them theory and the subtle art of not giving an F. And he basically said these books strike me as being about how to protect yourself from other people.
Yeah, I mean, if you go through the world and your orientation is, I don't give an F, well,
Yeah,
how healthy is that?
yeah.
Okay, was there anything else that you wanted to say? Because if not, I want to get into a bit more about the miracle minded training that we have coming up.
I think what I want to say is trying to tease out this model of therapy is a process that's still going on, but we're ready now to do a level one training. And the promise here is for a new form of therapy that would be the best of what's already out there, but would take things to a deeper level so that we really could help people move from that one worldview to a whole different orientation towards self and others that is purely positive. And what a gift to the world that would be.
And so unmind right now. I think that in general, as I said in the introduction, I think students are familiar that there is a psychotherapy supplement, but we haven't quite figured out what to do with it. I know many students who have been reading the course for decades and haven't touched either one of the supplements, thinking that, oh, they're ancillary and how relevant are they to our everyday life. But what has been so striking to me about the work that we've been doing over these last few years is he has a system. He has a goal and a system for how to get there. And that's what we're calling miracle minded therapy. And it really can be such a healing for our world that desperately needs it. But it can also be such a augment to the path of A Course in Miracles. And there's the book itself and going through the book, and then there's all kinds of different arms from the book, whether it's mind to mind healing or miracle minded therapy of talk healing or any number of things, teacher pupil relationships, study groups. We have no idea the potential of this path. And we are just at the start of it. And I can see 100 years from now, I hope 10 years from now, 1 year from now, to have trained course based therapists who can help people unwind these twisted perceptions we have, and that patients emerge from this form of therapy better, more peaceful, more loving, and are able to contribute to the healing of this place, not just be withdrawn and guarded. That's my dream. I know it's yours too.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about miracle minded therapy, the training that we're offering that's starting on April 22nd. As I mentioned, we've been working on this behind the scenes for over 3 years now with two therapists, Deborah Disney and Derek Izzetti, in an effort to develop curriculum, to take what's on the pages of the course and turn it into curriculum that would train therapists on how to conduct miracle minded therapy. And so I'm hoping that in the remaining just couple of minutes that we have, Robert, that you can walk us through the modules of that training very quickly. And I do want to say here at the outset that our miracle minded therapy training is not for those who need therapy. It's for those who want to give therapy to other people, whether it's formally or informally. Although you don't have to be a therapist to take this course. The course says itself says that we're all performing therapy all the time. We're all trying to heal each other with language. And so these are tools that you could use regardless of whether you're a formal practitioner of therapy or not. So tell us a little bit about the course.
Well, I can go through the 10 modules.
Fire away.
Okay.
But, it's 10 modules. That's
Yeah.
a lot. So just.
Yeah. Okay. So the first is a unique form of therapy. We are talking about this as a standalone form of therapy, not a set of ideas that can be added onto some other form. Number two, the therapist as healed healer. Central to this form of therapy is that the therapist themselves needs to embody, ideally a little more than the patient, these principles of mental health. Three, the holy relationship between therapist and patient. We talked a bit about that already. Four, the basic process of miracle-minded therapy. And we've been talking about that in this conversation, that movement. How do you move someone from that one worldview to the other? Number five, the problem, perception of an attacking world. We've talked about that, but we'll go into that more fully. Number six, the solution, forgiveness. Forgiveness is that movement from the one worldview to the other. Number seven, hearing and questioning the dirge. There's this remarkable teaching in the supplement itself where it says that our unforgiveness of others is a song we sing to ourselves, and we don't realize that it's a song of our own guilt. We don't hear the guilt side of the song. And if we can hear that the song of unforgiveness, which seems to elevate us, is actually a song that condemns us, we can change our tune. Number eight, Jesus as therapist. This is where we're going to look at the discourse on Bill's parents. And it's like the master class in what we're trying to do here. So we're going to look at that closely. Number nine, I want to change the number 9 one, so I won't talk about that right now. But I want to change the theme number 9, and
Mystery module.
you missed the mystery module. And number 10 is a review and talking about what's next.
If you want to join us for Miracle Minded Therapy, you're welcome to sign up at circleofa.org/therapy level 1. That's the number 1. And we are really just about at the top of the hour. So that's all that we have time for today. Robert, thank you once again for all of the work that you've poured into pulling this structure of therapy out of what's in the course. It's really been inspiring to see, and I can't wait to share it starting on the 22nd. And so again, if this conversation has sparked something in you, whether you're a therapist or a student or simply someone who cares about the healing of our minds, you're welcome to join us for Miracle Minded Therapy Level 1 training beginning on April 22nd. open to anyone. You don't have to be a therapist to join in, and you can find all the details again at circleofa.org/therapy level one, the number one. On behalf of all of us here at the Circle, thank you so much for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.